All right, dude, let's kick this off. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Like we were talking before we started, you're the first Canadian military member I've had on the show. So I'm really interested in kind of digging into the Canadian military and how you guys have worked with the U.S. military and stuff, because, you know, many people don't know outside of the military, Canadian military has really been an integral part of the global war on terror. You know, you guys have been partners in that since the very beginning. So it's been an interesting 2 decades for your military as well. I guess if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and why you decided to join the Canadian military.
Yeah. You just kind of glazed over a monster of a topic there, which I do hope we explore. So I'm Jeff Depatie. I'm from Northern Ontario, Canada. As I had mentioned earlier, I am applying for my U.S. residency, so I can live south of the border. I was in the Canadian military for a better part of 15 years. Spent about 10 years of that kicking it in the SF in our Tier 1 solution, Joint Task Force 2, which is, you know, we work with your SEAL Team 6 and Delta and groups like that from the organization. And yeah, you know, I'll just get right to it, and I'll just say, yeah, in 1812, we were the only people to beat the war in the U.S. in a war. So let's go from there. No, I'm just kidding. I get it.
It's okay. It's okay. Hey, man, we no longer have a king or queen on our currency, so we're good.
Yeah, I know. We still salute the queen. What is that?
It's such a weird king now, right? Do you guys have to change your currency now that the queen has died and stuff, or how does that work?
I usually stay away from policy. I'm not much for flicking on the news and whatnot. I would imagine and hope that we reassess our whole relationship with the Commonwealth, and look at it more like, because like we pay to be part of the Commonwealth. We have to, you know, we like you said, our currency has to be visibly with these British ties and whatnot. And, you know, in my opinion, it's time we start moving on from that. So we'll see.
You guys actually, like, there's an actual, like, a fee, like you pay like a fee to be in the Commonwealth? Really? I thought it was just ceremonial. I didn't know there was any like real.
No, there's exchanges of money, and then there's ceremonial aspects, and then like who really knows what happens in the backslapping rooms, you know?
Is this a very political topic in Canada, like how the currency is going to move forward after the Queen died? This isn't something I looked up, so I did not plan if this turns into a political discussion.
Yeah, well, no, and like I said, I never turn on the news, so I don't know what is political or not. I don't think it would be that monstrous of a deal. Like I know down here when there's talks of currency changes and whatnot, you know, going into like solid coin dollar bills to save billions and whatnot, like it starts to ruffle feathers more. In Canada, I mean, we've changed our currency materials and designs a bunch of times, so I don't think it would have the same kind of weight. Although most of the currency doesn't really have the Queen on it. Most of it has like our governor generals and prime ministers and, you know, really Canadian kind of montages and backgrounds and animals like that. So maybe the one bill that whatever King Henry or King George or whatever the king is, I don't even know, might make his way on to. You know?
That's so interesting. I always wondered about that. And it's funny because like a lot of the guys I met through the military that were like Australian or New Zealand or whatever, that had these like ties to the British like monarchy kind of deal. None of them were for, not that they weren't for it, but it was not a, I don't know. I always just thought it was weird that they still have these ties back to the UK. Can you like, okay, well, if you're in like the Canadian military and you're part of this Commonwealth, is it easy to switch into the UK military? Is there any kind of like connection that way?
Yeah, there is interoperability that way. It's not super fast. There was a time where a Canadian citizen could apply to the US military and it'd probably be almost the same amount of time for the switchover. But there is a little bit more fluidity there. There is some passport benefits and things of that nature, but it's all slowly dying. It really what it is it's time to drop those old psychic pillars, you know, those constructs of our mind. But what kind of I think gets a little tricky is, you know, isolating ourselves more and more is also not ideal. You know what I mean? It's like we're not trying to move away from our allyships. We're not trying to stop working with these groups. It's just some things have to change, and that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, relationships totally fall apart. So
100%.
How our government handles it right now, I'm not really sure because, well, I got to just say I don't follow politics. It gives me a headache, so I
Yeah.
steer clear. You know.
I try not to. I try to keep up with enough to understand what's going on so that's, the wild shit doesn't just go by without anybody like saying anything or doing anything. But there's so many like, dare I say, extremists on both sides of it, that are just like on both sides of the political spectrum that are just, it's just too much to even try to listen to. Like as soon as you hear
Well,
someone say some crazy stuff, you're like, all right, dude, I can't even have a conversation with you. Like we can't talk about
so
politics.
that's the thing right now is politics shouldn't be so hyper polarized in the way that it is. We should have push pull, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
it's the only way we're going to find some kind of center. But this mutually assuring opposition that they're
Mm-hmm.
playing, that's really just harming everybody else. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I get it. We're in the West, and my Amazon gets here on time and whatnot, and I have a full belly of food, but we're starting to feel these old tethers that are starting to erode. It's just a matter of time before the insanity, the pull, not just politically, but the atmosphere that it is creating, both in economics and in individuals, is going to be a bit of um, a powder keg. Hopefully, not a violent powder keg, but
Mm-hmm.
it's there's too much underrepresentation. It may feel like at a moment, and I'm just going to use left and rights just as an example.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
easy.
give a shit either way. They're both pretty destructive. When the lefts are in, the rights feel left out. When the rights are in, the lefts feel, and that is not a healthy democracy, in my opinion, because the people are not being fully represented. And as long as we're continuing to use old fear-based paradigms, which these systems are built on, we're just going to keep running into the same problems and wondering why our head's getting sore against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is it's a really messed up situation that has been brought on by inappropriate rhetoric from our politicians, that are quick to call their opponents the worst of the worst, be it Nazis, be it racist, be it whatever, on either side. This is on either side. That kind of like quickness to go to the most extreme rhetoric and describe your opponent as the most extreme of the extreme. They want to, everyone sees US politics. And unfortunately for foreign people, they only see the mainstream media of US politics because there's not a lot of independent news unless you're on the internet going through news. But like just to turn on the TV in another country, you're not going to find an independent news source. You're going to find CNN or a major news network that may not actually be giving the full picture. So it's unfortunate for foreigners because it's like you guys are seeing this one perspective of what's going on in the US, but that's not really it. Because I can walk down the street and say hi to my neighbors and everything's good to go. Most of the issues that we see are because of our politicians and their inappropriate and extreme rhetoric that they use to describe their opponents just to maintain power or get something that they want done. It's really gross. And it's becoming commonplace, not just in the U.S. I think in a lot of government systems we're seeing it, and luckily I think people are starting to get tired of it, and they're just like, dude, I just don't like you said you don't really keep up with politics from the news. It's just too much. I'm the same way. I used to be on it constantly. Like I'm still kind of follow the news, but the rhetoric from the politicians is just too much to listen to. The gaslighting and stuff,
Yeah. Yeah. What I would say is this. I agree with you. Like, I've been to almost every state except Alaska, and I've traveled
nice.
extensively across the U.S. I love the country. I love the geography of the country. I like the diversity of the people from one end to the other. Most of the country is pretty fucking awesome, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the real shame is, and I think they use this though. They always use hot button topics, whether it's for foreign affairs or whatnot. That's what these groups do, right? Because money moves a lot more when the pot is stirred,
Mm-hmm.
and so like I think the real shame is that the U.S. gets a worse rap than it really deserves. You know what I mean? Because yes, when the giant that is the U.S. makes a move, everybody gets to feel it on a global scale. But that doesn't mean that like every American should be following under what this is. Yes, foreign policy benefits those people and the moves they make. I think what happens is with pride, you get closed node thinking, and you get a duality. And with closed node thinking, you only think from a place of implicit bias. So you have these politicians who are formed, they're formed, most of them from, I'm just going to keep using it, fear-based thinking, more limbic thinking, less open and creative and welcoming and accepting thought processes. And what happens is they get fired up and then they just stay locked in their herds and they stay there, Probably one could argue that the issue is that it's just not quite bad enough to really push back. You know what I mean? Like I was saying, like we're not starving. I mean, there is a lot of starving people in Canada and the US, but like by and large, most of these things are, but this is where the long term is not going to work out because it's collapsing, right? Our natural resources are being stretched to the edges. And once these things happen, human beings are going to be faced with their human nature in a very aggressive way. And it's going to be either we do it on purpose or it comes to us unintentionally, circumstantially. And I think we should just do it on purpose. That's what I like. We kind of touched on this earlier. You'd mentioned about PTSD. We're really great, super good at shining a light on an issue. What we suck at is a solution to that issue and then implementing that solution. We can usually have some convoluted way of adding to the problem in the long term and not really fixing the problem. And that's where we started like working, whether it's through working with veterans or civilians. We started following a thread of the term called post-traumatic growth. So we have PTSD, which is a non-coping state. Yes, I will say it's an evolutionary survival mechanism, if you will. And post-traumatic growth is in essence the other side of that, where you catalyze those difficult experiences and you transmute those fears, those traumas, those non-coping mechanisms into something more positive. And that positivity is usually connection to yourself, connection to others, connection to the community in a wider range. What it does is it allows us full access to our brain, not just our left brain, which is very A to B, not just our limbic area, but it starts to nurture the whole picture of our mind. And it can be a little bit daunting at first because projecting from the right hemisphere, we don't really have language. It doesn't produce language. So it's very hard to communicate in abstract ways. It doesn't mean it's impossible. We've just kind of lost that art form. And that goes back to the politicians. As long as they try to just communicate from a dualistic nature that serves them mostly, we're going to be fucking running into issues over and over and over. And that's why we started formulating this. Okay, well, how do we intentionally facilitate post-traumatic growth? And we've been doing it for years now, inducing the states, the altered states of consciousness to start breaking the patterns that people become almost victim to. Because that's what suffering is in essence, is when you become addicted to the patterns that don't serve you. And then you literally get addicted to those fear states and you play them out. It's like Dante's Inferno, his map of the consciousness was just that, replaying things that don't serve you. And so whenever someone has like this pang in them, they're like, oh man, that doesn't feel right. They don't really have the words to flip, but it's like, I feel like I'm just going through the hamster wheel. I'm just doing the motions. I'm going through it again, like, oh, and they can't readjust per se. Sometimes it's because the problem's so massive once we start looking at global issues and even country level issues. But what we can do is we can believe in ourselves and we can start doing it for ourselves. This is to me is the future of mankind, is every individual beginning to look inwards and realize their patterning that they have from the DNA that's wound into us, the epigenetics and the control elements that play onto that DNA, our childhood development, things that happen in adolescence, and then our adulthood patterning, so that we don't get to like 35, 40, 45 and be like, oh no, man, I've been living out this cockeyed life, because these energies that were pushed onto me earlier on have shaped my behavior. And then people get confused. They think it's their personality. And then they entrench sometimes even more because now they're addicted to the patterns. They have, it's like sometimes in chess, where you got to go in deeper. I mean, that's an illusion. But there's not a lot of things to promote this reverse patterning. And like in the case of veterans, there's nothing quite like the conditioning that a soldier goes through, right? We go into basic training and we're hammered on, we go into our occupational trade and we're hammered on, and like physically and psychologically, you know, we're shaped into a soldier, which is good if you want to be a soldier, right? Usually the issue happens afterwards when you're, okay, I'm done being a soldier and I want to move on. And we get this huge complex patterning of, now I got to shift my identity. What's my purpose? What do I do? You know, because like many of us, it's our tools from the military are not directly transferable to civilian world. Yeah, I could become a contractor, work in the government, but how do I shift these? And then you start dealing with the reprogramming of the brain that could have PTSD symptoms, and they all start to work together to create this fucking soup sandwich that just gets blanketed as PTSD. And unfortunately, right now, if you're diagnosed with PTSD, the insurance companies and the doctors and stuff see this as a cash cow, right? And then usually they say, oh, it's uncurable. Like, there is nothing worse than fucking a struggling, whatever, first responder, soldier, corporate Joe or Jane being told there is no solution to this. It's like, that's heartbreaking in my opinion. And unless you have like real DNA damage, or the actual tissues have been so concussively broken, because, you know, concussive damages can lead to PTSD. You know, there's this gold. Your suffering can be mined, and it can be a boon. It can be a gift for everyone around you. And but it's hard, right? The ego is the ego, and it wants to get in the way.
Yeah, I think, man, with PTSD and people getting, I think you made a really good point there when you're talking about a lot of people are diagnosed with PTSD when that's not really it. It's just I always said that. I was like, you know what? Anyone that has ever gone and done anything in the military can say they have PTSD because they've experienced something so much different than what the average person or the average like reality, you know, is. And then it's just like, and then when you come back from that, even let's say you go to Iraq, even me as a mechanic. So when I first came in, I was a mechanic for the first 3 years. I was on base the whole time. There was nothing crazy. You know, there was mortar attacks occasionally, nothing crazy. But to say going and living in a desert and turning wrenches every day, and, you know, the possibility of maybe getting mortared happening, to say doing that for 7 months and then not expecting any kind of changes in my, like, I don't know, attitude, understanding of the world, whatever, would be kind of ignorant, I think. You know, there's going to be, just like if I went on a 3-month like overseas vacation, or if I studied abroad in college, that experience is going to be so much different than the average college students. And it's going to leave you with thoughts and ideas and stuff that they haven't considered, or put you in positions that they never thought about. You know what I'm saying? It's just like I don't know. I think PTSD gets thrown around a lot. I think you're right on there. And I think a lot of people coming out of the military would benefit solely from just finding a group, you know, because in the military, you're taught the team, you're talking, you know, your unit, your squad, your whatever. That's, you know, that's the group. You live with them, you work with them, you play with, you know, you do all the stuff. These are the people all the time, you know, you're with them all the time. And then you leave the military, and then suddenly this core group of people that are literally involved with every aspect of your life are no longer there, you know?
Yeah.
And suddenly you're surrounded by people that have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about getting up to go PT in the morning before chow or whatever. They're like, what are you even saying right now? You know, it's like, so a lot of people have a hard time relating with the average citizen. And I think the best thing that they can do is get involved with some kind of veterans group, not necessarily like the VFW or something like that, or even an official group. Really, it's just, one, I would say get involved with a group. I know there's groups like PB Abate, which is pretty popular. It's a growing organization. I think people ought to check that out. The VFW is not a bad choice if you've got one in your local area. But find something that you enjoy. Find something that you have some kind of buy into. You know, as a JTAC in the military or in the Marines, and then you as like a special operator, every day is like life or death. There's literal life or death decisions that could be made. And I don't mean that like literally life or death every day, but when you go and train, there's some real shit that could happen there. just the helicopter could fall out of the sky. You know, you could fall off the fast rope. The explosives could have been a little stronger. For me, as a JTAC, the bomb heading could be a little bit off. The target could be a little bit closer than I thought it was. You know, there's all these things that could happen that make the job dangerous naturally, and that's pounded into your head constantly. Hey, this is a dangerous job. Hey, don't fuck up. You could get someone killed. Hey, you have to be correct, because if not, the bad things will happen. And it's not wrong. It's real. And then you leave a job like that and you come out to the real world and it's like, well, if I don't do this, what's going to happen? Oh, lives aren't going to end. So to me, a lot of this stuff feels like bullshit. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to find meaning in stuff because it all feels like bullshit after the world I left that was super intense and there was meritocracy and there was like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I would love to touch on a few points here, Justin, because one, everything I say, I hope that it resonates with a soldier. Two, we're all about making this movement, not just for veterans, but for literally the species. So one, you touched on something, understanding that stress is chronic or it's acute. It's the one explosion that changes your life forever, or it's 7 months of thinking, even if it's back here, it's still here. I could die today. And that literally reshapes your neurological map of reality in your brain. And it literally begins to work on your DNA through your epigenetics. And that takes time to undo. Mm-hmm. That's just the same thing that happened. Okay, so the pressure that led there, well, now you got to decompress. That's like decompressions. I mean, the Marines are really pretty decent at spearheading this. It lacks luster a bit. And it's way too short to actually decompress, right? You do 7 months in a war zone. Well, my decompression actually should probably be longer. That's just the nature of reality, so that your nervous system can readapt. Because you said it, experience is the wormhole to growth, but that does not mean it's going to be easy, right? You go to a war zone, it may have some moments of feeling easy, and there is easy aspects of it, right? Everything is dictated down to you. Your food is delivered most by and large, so there's a lot of aspects for the Maslowian needs that are pretty easy. What gets tricky, it can be almost nothing is impossible. I don't want to ever, when it comes to PTSD, I don't like giving impossibles because one, a soldier doesn't do impossible. It's finding the value in it. So use the word meaning. Meaning is way too contemplative and takes too long. Finding the value in what you've experienced is a much quicker way to figure out that eventual meaning. It's just easier. We work with value a lot more. Like I am the meaning of this, the meaning, it can be very difficult in the universe. The universe is very complex, but how it's of value to you isn't. And that value can be as simple as, how has this experience made me stronger? Even if I don't feel stronger right now, I'm in the depths of apathy and shame. How can I make this, or how can I reformulate this thought pattern so that I'm stronger? How can I use this as a tool for growth? And then, so one of the things we've been working on is a program called Citizen Green. Up north in Canada, we're going to be able to deliver it to veterans for free through a cannabis company. And what will happen is we have legalized cannabis across the whole country. Mm-hmm. And then our Veterans Affairs has medical cannabis for vets.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is good. A lot of people are still hesitant about cannabis, but guys, it is a very, very powerful tool. It's not to be abused. It shouldn't be just to numb you out and survive. It has really, really great place, really great benefits for pain, for PTSD, for anything, for disease. There's all kinds of things about rewriting the genetic programming, not the DNA, but like the epigenetic programming in you. And you touched on it. You said group. So we filmed a documentary called Dark Night of Our Soul. Every single intervention, every single one of them, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin, any altered state, whether it's an experience, whatever, it almost always, and I only say almost because there are no absolutes, started with talking with someone else. I can't make sense of reality just in my own head. That'll just become my own version of that reality, and that'll be false. That's how it works. We try to use our senses to make sense of reality, but that's just not, we live in this collective dream called humanity right now, So what we do is people get into that program, they get their cannabis for free through the medical, and then they get access to our programming. And our programming is exactly that. It's to help them shift identity or build identity. It's to help them pursue purpose, find where their skills overlap, to nurture growth traits. And then you said about a common value, which I do want to touch on, because I think this is one of the things that soldiers might lean back on that they shouldn't. And then, but first I want to mention we are bringing it to the U.S. We're able to do it with a discounted rate of 30% for where it's not covered for veterans, which is most states. But then they'll get access to this programming for free, because it is good to have some like-minded people around you, right? It's very hard to talk about, a body splitting open during a battle, getting this concussive damage, like the whole, the fog of war that can set in, right? When you are, no matter whether you're exhilarated by it or not, your body is actually in a scared state. It's adrenaline's going, it's a state of fear. Even if you don't feel scared, you feel like an extreme guy. So this is like the one thing, like, you're not wrong. Soldiers need a place to relate, but also they need to learn that they need to relate to their new environment as well. Which is kind of like a shitty pill to swallow. I think the government is doing a really bad job of this, north and south of the border, east and west of the pond. It doesn't matter where, helping soldiers reintegrate properly. Like I said, like when Rambo said it, you don't just turn this shit off, like that's the truth of it. It's a very powerful, it's very powerful neural mechanisms that get played in. But we do need to help soldiers reintegrate into the civilian world, because I experienced the same thing when I came out. I came from a tier 1 unit, and I was like, what the fuck is going on around me? That's all I could think about. I was like, no standards, no fucking this, no that, and I was very quick to point my fingers. And I was like, you know what, like, I'm gonna create a program to help find these people, help people become their next level of what is capable in your situational awareness, what your body is capable of outputting. And it took me a little while, though, for me to be like, oh yeah, but I exist in a different world now too. So Jeff, you have to adapt to it. That doesn't mean you give up everything, right? The whole idea of people working together is to evolve our species. So it's not like an all or not, but just, yeah, finding the value of the experience can be a little bit tricky, especially for ones that start dabbling with moral wounds where you're like, fuck, man, maybe I shouldn't have pulled the trigger. Or maybe, like you start letting those things weigh in a little bit. It can get a little bit trickier to find the value, but there's always value. You have survived something. Bring that experience, bring those teachings to those around you. And then really for the wounded person, which is most people, learn how this fear is actually controlling you, where you're lacking love for yourself or those around you. And people get confused by that word love, because we don't fully nurture it in not just the modern world, but in the world at large. Our consciousness as a species is not fully adapted to what conscious level, like full expanded consciousness level love as a society can look like. Because that's usually what happens. It's the lack of that. And if you look at it hormonally, with PTSD, you lack the love, the oxytocins, the serotonins, the satiating hormones, ghrelin and whatnot. You stop using your septum pellucida. You stop using these parts of your brain that nurture these other sides of life, and a fucking gray veil sets in, right? And busting through that gray veil can be difficult, but that's where things like altered states come in. That's where talking to other people come in, listening to podcasts with people who are trying to root out the messaging, such as yourself, things of that nature. But it just food for thought. And again, it's not like a finger wag at the soldiers. It's just, oh yeah, I'm not that soldier anymore. And what I think happens, especially for dudes, and this could be completely wrong, lots of men, even the most shriveled up, spineless men, have like a warrior nature to them. The whole provide, preside, protect, pleasure, persevere, those kinds of that mentality. And when you leave, it's very hard to be a warrior the same way. Yeah, you can go to the gym and call it warrior training. You can do a few things and call it warrior training. But where I think men should look at is like, how the fuck are they warriors of love? How are they bringing more love into the world than fear? and really do an audit on that. Like, am I creating circumstances that imbalance this? And you don't have to be that creative. You just look at, okay, am I putting pressure on systems such as nature, on people around me? How's my interaction with other people? Am I polite? Am I friendly? You know, and it doesn't have to be weird. It just, I think it's really the future of men. This will be the new perimeter men set for the world so that our species can expand and evolve.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure, and you're right. I think people that get out, it's really finding yourself. And a lot of times you hear about these guys that have severe PTSD that try what's that stuff? Wasaka, or I don't even know the name of it. It's like
ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. I said wasaka. Ayahuasca or shrooms or something like that. And a lot of it sounds like guys are just finding themselves again. You know, that's like they have to do that to have an honest, really dirty conversation with themselves about who they are and where they stand in life. And then it's like from there they can kind of grow, you know. I like I really want to touch again on the cannabis, and I'm a pro cannabis guy, and I think that people abuse cannabis. I think that people call it medicine and they say they use it as medicine when they don't. And I also think that people use it for medicine and it is a medicine for them. I think everybody's got to find what's good for them. I'm not big on CBD and all that stuff. I'm not necessarily, there's probably science behind it. I'd like to see more of it. I haven't researched it, I'll be honest. But I think a lot of people try to give like cannabis and stuff more accolades than it really deserves, I guess. But with that, there are definitely ways for people to use it responsibly and stuff. Here in the U.S., another group, I don't know if you've heard of them, the Hellman Valley Growers Company is here out of Carlsbad, California. It's a former MARSOC Raider started that cannabis company, and they're also doing a lot of research in how that can help veterans and stuff. People should check that out and maybe buy some product from them if they're here in California. But and they're not a sponsor, so this is just me throwing that out there. But yeah, I think there is a place. I don't know, man. I think people just have to find what works for them. People have to find a passion. You can't walk away from something like the military into nothing and expect to be okay. You have to be passionate about something. I completely agree with you. That warrior mentality is hard to maintain when you're like, what am I doing this for? Yeah, I could get up at 04 and go kill myself at the gym and then do this and that, but I'm not. There's no deployments on the horizon for me. You know, like, is this just a show for myself, or, you know, so it's a weird world out there, and people have to figure it out for themselves. And there's no one blueprint, you know. And what I've told a lot of guys, and I don't know how the benefits are for the Canadian military when you get out. The American military benefits are pretty good. And luckily a lot of people take advantage of them. But I think I saw a stat the other day that said only 35% of American veterans use the GI Bill, which is kind of mind-blowing because that's free college. And I got it. Like if you are very anti like woke and think the colleges are just, you know, putting out bullshit and you don't want to be part of that, totally get it. However, understand that the GI Bill covers more than just like a university to go get a degree in philosophy. You can use that to go become a mechanic for race cars, or you can learn how to weld, or, you know, like whatever. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that. And I tell guys, I'm like, you know, when you're leaving the military, this is one of those few opportunities in life. It's a crossroad. And you really have to decide what you want to do at that crossroad. Am I going to just go down the normal path and, you know, go get a degree or whatever and go work at a 9-to-5 job in my cubicle and just, you know, live the rest of my life doing that kind of stuff? Or use this opportunity where I see I have these benefits that are coming in. There's you get paid to go to college, you get paid to do these things, which gives people a little bit of a cushion that the average person wouldn't have. And use that as a moment to maybe try something that you've always wanted to do, that, you know, just take that risk because you can. You know what I'm saying? We have a little bit of a cushion to help us out because we have, if I go to college here in California and in San Diego, if I'm a full-time student using the GI Bill, on top of paying for my school completely, I'm getting $2,500 a month plus, you know, or more in money for rent, what does that allow you to do? How many college students would love to be getting their rent paid every month while they're a full-time student, when many are full-time students and they work to pay for their stuff? And what I'm getting at is, this is an opportunity where you don't have to necessarily work a side job while you're in college like the average student would. You could use that time to focus on that dream project that you wanted to do, or that dream kind of thing that you wanted to focus on. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I tell people, look at the benefits that are available. Use the opportunity at hand. If you have this chance to go do it, whatever it is you ever wanted to do outside of the military, this is probably one of the few times that you're going to be able to do it. And it'd be right after getting out of the military. You got to jump on that kind of momentum of like, I want to do something big when I get out. Because if you get out and you just fall into the old routines, you go back to your hometown, you start hanging out with your old buddies, and they're all potheads and whatever. And, this is me. This is my buddies are potheads and stuff like that. And, I have former friends that are criminals now, but if I would have went back home and started hanging out with the criminals and doing that kind of shit again, where would I be? So it's like, you have to look at that cross in the road and figure out which way you want to take, that path.
Yeah. I agree. Man. Why is important? Because it activates your prefrontal cortex. The problem is people transition and they don't always have a dream. Everybody has something that I think that their soul is calling out to do. It might be small, it might be big. But like you said, if you got that kind of coverage, don't even think about it as I'm going to become X. Just, I'm going to go explore X. So I know that's not where I want to go. It's covered. You'll learn along the way. And I recommend, unless you have something very specific, explore a pole.
For sure.
Explore where you're not used to, where your nervous system and your brain are not used to being, because that's where it'll actually begin to expand. I use an equation. It's kind of a derivative of a psychologist named Lewin, and it's P plus E equals B. That's personality plus environment equals behavior. And it automatically, what he's saying is, if you change your environment, your behavior will change. And that's what you got to do when you're leaving the military. Unless you're going to become a contractor or continue doing like very militant style stuff, you got to learn to adapt your behavior. Yeah. You mentioned cannabis, finding yourself, all this stuff. Like, this is right up my alley, because some people use cannabis as a distraction. Are you distracting yourself from your pain? Are you distracting yourself from your healing? Are you distracting yourself from your wife or your husband? Are you distracting yourself from living? And that's usually, distractions are another word for addictions that people have to root out. As for a powerful tool for medicine, it is an amazing way for people to get in touch with their emotions. So we're all emotional beings. Most of our neural anatomy, not most, but a lot of it is dedicated to emotions that we cut off. And we will not find we won't find joy and peace, happiness, acceptance, if we don't explore those realms, if we don't allow our emotional toolbox, which is closed down for a lot of military people, just by the nature of the job, to expand. And what happens in there is my single greatest call to action for everyone, which is to find your own individuality. Not be an individual, but really discover who you are. Cannabis is a great tool for this. Education is a great tool for this. Even if it's like, you don't want to conform, I totally get that. I get it. That's the whole idea of finding your own individuality. And for guys and gals that don't know, we have something similar in Canada. You guys call it the GI Bill. I don't even know what the fuck we call it. It's some kind of education. You can use it up to 12 years later, but it would be a great time to do that. Maybe the military or the Veterans Affairs can start looking at spreading out a little bit more, because some people want to get out and they want to start making money. They got these other things, and like there's just some ways so it's not so you got to be in school full time or whatnot. But yeah, man.
Well, the Veterans Affairs here, the way it works is you either get part-time benefits or full-time benefits. So if you take one college class, then you're considered a part-time student, and you get a prorated like BAH, the allowance for housing. That $2,600 I said would be down to like $1,200, because the assumption is if you're only taking one class, well then you're doing something else. You got to be making money. But if you're taking 5 classes or 4, I think the credit hours is 12 to become considered full-time, which would be normally 4 classes. So if you're taking 4 classes, you're going to get that full amount. Yeah, man, it's just, so when I first got out, I had taken some classes while I was in still, so I couldn't just transfer to, most schools require you to have if you have any credits, you have to have a minimum amount to transfer in to be a transfer student. So I had to go to the community college and take some classes. And when I first started there, my plan was to get in, to try to get in. I was like, man, I really, it'd be a cool job, travel the world and become like a documentarian, be a guy that films documentaries and stuff and just go see crazy stuff. And I quickly realized like the reality of that happening is not very good unless you're super rich or, a lot of people that are super rich are going to fund you to do something like that. And I just didn't know what classes to take. So I just kind of fell into the normal business administration kind of path that a lot of people do because they're used to that structure. They're told that the military training and stuff would be great in the business world and all this stuff. So I started taking these business classes and immediately I was like, man, this feels like all roads lead to a cubicle here. This isn't what I really wanted, and switched to a journalism and advertising degree when I went to SDSU. When I got accepted as a transfer student to SDSU, they have a journalism program, but underneath that program is also an advertising focus. And I was like, my point of view was, I can take this JMS, this journalism and media studies degree, get this degree that has a focus in advertising, but it also covers other journalism courses. And now I'm kind of have two different paths I could take if I wanted. Maybe I do want to continue and try to be this documentarian or maybe get into the news world or whatever. Well, then I can, I went to the School of Journalism, so I can put that on my resume. But I also did a lot of focus classes on advertising. So maybe the journalism thing doesn't pay well or it's not working out. Well, then I have this other avenue that I can kind of venture down in advertising. That's kind of where I went. I'm more in digital marketing now and stuff like that. But what you said, college is that opportunity to go, hey, I want to do this. And then you kind of realize like, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe this is a better path. It helps kind of clear up those paths and give you some kind of, some time to mess up, I guess, to make bad decisions. Because if I would have just went into, the ability for me to see that I don't like this, that I'm like, oh, I'm in business statistics and this isn't the most exciting of things, was a lot, because you don't realize that when you're not in a job, you're on the outside looking in going, man, that would be a super cool job to do that. That sounds like a great job. I've seen it on TV and that looks awesome. And then you go and you start doing the job and you figure out all the minutia behind it, all the little stuff. And you're like, man, this isn't really that as much fun as I thought it was. So I think you're right. I think, college or whatever people do right after is a good time to kind of figure out what you want, where you're going. And like I told my own son, I was like, you know what, man, I'm almost 40 years old and I started a whole new career. So don't feel like you're obligated to choose something and that's your path for life. Like do what you want to do and don't be afraid to walk away from something to say, this isn't for me. I need to do something else and start over. And it's going to be tough. And there's situations where you can do that. And there's times where you might have to delay that decision because you got a family to support, or you have these, other circumstances. But in the end of the day, if you're not happy, then you're not happy. If you're not doing what makes you happy, then what kind of life is that? And it's only one life to live. So
yeah, that's where I say, like, you root out how can I feel joy? What's not causing me joy? And that's how you nurture those things. Something I do, you might have heard of like the Myers-Briggs personality index, personality psychometrics and stuff. So a lot of them are designed to measure who you are. And it kind of says, this is where you're at. One, I think that's a very, very dangerous and slippery slope, ever quantifying an individual human being. Like, you are completely unique. Like, you may have some patterns, but you are completely, from the atomic level to the cellular level, unique. And one of the things you can do though with these metrics is, as you're exploring who you are, you do them and then it'll be like, oh, you're like this. Okay, well, what is everything I'm not like? And that's what you should nurture. That's how you become a more whole person. That's how you develop your brain in a more holistic. That's how you develop your emotional intelligence more. That's how you can learn to control your impulses more. And in that, as you meander that river, you'll stumble across your path, like you told your son, especially when we try to find something that's a performance-based metric, like based on money or hierarchy or prestige or status or idolism or something like that. Those are almost always false roads. Every now and then there is people who fall down them and they're exactly where they should be and they bring beautiful works into the world. But for the other whatever 399 billion people or million people, like for example in the US, like that's not going to be how it is. And your own individuality, because it's unique to you, is going to take time for you to root it out. You know what I mean? And that, I think that's a really great thing as a dad, as a father, to set that safe space, that psychological safe space for your son to explore these concepts instead of being like, oh, boxed up. He's confident, letting himself, his being, his nervous system, explore these new areas, without feeling, I mean, the billions of pressures and consciousness feedback loops that we deal with every day.
Yeah. I said, you got to set guardrails, to keep them on the right path without being like, here's the exact steps you have to take at every step of your life. You will get a 4.0 GPA in high school and you will become part of the school, whatever, you will go to college and study something within this. You will, like, that's not my decision to make, and that's not right. And I don't think that's like good for the mental health. I think that's where you see a lot of depressed adults is they were pushed down this path that wasn't necessarily the right path for them, but it was what other people thought was the right path for them. And they get to this adulthood position and realize like, what the fuck have I been doing? I'm not happy. This isn't what I wanted to do. I'm looking back and wishing I would have done, social media is the worst because now you can look at all your buddies that you grew up with and go, oh, this guy's doing this. Man, why didn't I take that path? Or this guy. So it's horrible. It's like, I don't know. I just tell people just do what makes you feel good while also being a productive member of society.
Yeah. The question is like, well, how do I find that? Well, you kind of touched on one of the big ones there. Distraction. If you're distracting yourself, if you're like Instagram, for example, it's an inadequacy engine, right? Everything is like filtered to be like this world that doesn't exist. And as long as you're trying to like, you get addicted to this pattern, through our hormonal responses and whatnot. And as long as you play into it, you are playing into someone else's inadequacy, because their essence is put into that. Not just like the individual players within the MLM that is those social media constructs. So yeah, it adds a whole different layer for the young people today, especially you add in what they're talking about now, like peak population and, AI is going to start removing jobs and all this kind of stuff. And
AI is going to be wild. That's the thing that I've been kind of keeping on, being in digital marketing and stuff like that. I kind of keep tabs on AI, and I actually just spoke at a conference recently about AI integration into marketing efforts and businesses using AI. And a lot of people don't realize what's coming down the pipeline. And it's unfortunate that we get so fucking caught up in the noise. I was telling one of my buddies who's super into politics, follows everything. He's one of those guys that just, he's all over it. And he's picked his side and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, he'll start talking about something. I'm like, man, you're just talking about the noise. They're getting you riled up with the noise. That shit doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, you're getting mad about something that has no effect on you at all. And then you ask them about something like AI, and it's like, don't really know what it is, don't really know how it's being used. And it's like, dude, this is something that's really going to affect you and your whole entire world in the next 5 years, and you don't even understand it. And it's like, what I try to tell people is like, this is the beginning of the internet. This is like 1998 all over again, where people are really starting to figure out the internet, and it's becoming more consumer friendly, and people are getting their hands on it and figuring out what to use it for and how it can be implemented. And we didn't know.
You ran into the problem right there, though. People are going to try to figure out how to use it, and they're going to backfill it with almost solely trying to make money. And that's where, like,
well, yeah,
so we run into the same insanity that we are in before. This path that we've like started down is destroying our earth. It's destroying our connection to people. It's destroying everything. And like, I'm not like super cynical about it, Justin. This is where I think people get concerned. Who is putting the variables into the algorithms?
Yeah.
And what are their agendas? You know what I mean? Like, because I do believe that at a certain point, AI is not only is it probably like an unstoppable future in terms of like its momentum is already happening. The biggest companies in the world are putting everything into it. Like, so it's not going to be stopping anytime soon. The actual act of AI. I do think it has a really positive place for humanity in the long run. I just really think it's like, Is it just going to be another marketing tool? Like, is
Well,
that what it is?
I
Like,
would
is it just going
say,
to be designed to separate us and to make topics more hot button so that we spend money? Like, is that,
well,
those are,
no,
I think, the concerns.
I think that's what people will use. I mean, like the internet, the internet itself is just such a breakthrough for mankind. The ability to talk to people around the world instantly about any topic. And again, if you look back at the early days of the internet, there was some very like monetization attempts there going on, but there was also a lot of like grassroots communities and people like grouping up and that didn't realize that there was these, other people in the world that had the same kind of ideas as them and stuff like that. There was a lot of positive. The AI is going to be like the internet where it is a tool, and how you are affected by it will be dictated by how you use it and how you interact with it. If you go to use AI for nefarious purposes, or you just want to make porn with it, or do whatever, like stuff like that, like whatever, then it is what it is. But if you use it as a tool to better understand your fellow man, or to give there's so many ways it can be used positively.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it comes down to, I don't know, with AI though, the biggest questions now are going to be regulations, how it's going to be regulated. And I'm also against the biases that are in AI. I don't like how ChatGPT will give you a moral kind of shellacking if you ask it certain questions or about certain people or whatever. It'll tell you, it's like, what are you giving me? I don't want to know any of this. Like, you're giving me a talking to because of this or that. Just give me the answer, and a company will come out with something that's not biased, or it's the least amount, or I don't know. Technology is weird. You always have to bounce information off other technologies. You can't just trust one source, in my opinion. But yeah, man, it's a weird world. And I guess to bring it around full circle, what I was talking about is people just got to be ready for it. People got to understand what's going on around them, and at least acknowledge AI is coming, and maybe interact with it a little bit so you understand how to use it, so you don't end up like your grandma trying to figure out Facebook, because early days of the internet, it was a bunch of younger people and technology focused people that understood it because they were using it as it was growing and becoming a thing, and they kept using it, and they fully they have a better understanding of it. Whereas someone that they ignored it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to see the internet, I don't want to have anything to do with it. 10 years later, they're like, all right, I have to use it now because everyone's using it. They get on and they have no idea what to do because they ignored it for so long. I see the same thing happening with AI. People need to be looking at it. So there's my rant there, man.
Then they can have a say on it. Like, if we look at the internet, the original protocols, TCP/IP, were U.S. Defense Department protocols, and then they were allowed into the world. And they started as mostly being used in universities and whatnot. But just that essence alone of where it started, now it's the biggest tool for economic control. It's giant. It's used for spying and social control like crazy around the world. So that's all. That would be my thing with AI, is like, okay, well, what is the essence we want to put into these algorithms? Like, what are they going to do? Because right now,
I can see the mind control behind it, where you say, hey, the government, puts down like, hey, the AI can only say this about this topic. That's an issue.
And let's just say they're trying to do it as a regulatory policy that is supposed to be good for us.
Yeah.
Who is this person that is putting this in there? Because most people have not done real deep work on themselves, and they have patterns that they play out that are not really great for the greater society. And then they put these control patterns on there. And that's like, right now in Canada, we're running into censorship issues comparatively to the US, because we don't have certain things in our equivalents to Bill of Rights.
Basically, all your news is government sponsored, right? Is all your news government sponsored, or is there independent news there?
There's independent news, but it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. They both sit on oppositions, and they pick a side, and that's who they dictate for, right? Because
gotcha.
It almost always comes down to dollars and cents when it comes to these things, right? Like, who's backing it? And that's like where my concern with AI is, because right now people, we call it haptics on our phones, but they're Pavlovian responses, and the conditioning patterns that are happening right now on our youth, like Generation Alpha or whatever, they've never been seen before in the history of mankind. And the issue is when you take down the blinders, you realize, holy fuck, we fucked up our oceans. Maybe not beyond repair. Oh man, all the stuff that sustains us is dwindling, and we're not any closer to stopping these patterns. And then we get into like these, maybe like, like most movies, and for some reason movies, our creatives really impact how our artistic creators really impact how our science unfolds, right? Because it gets into their psyche, and we do these things. And usually AI comes back and bites us in the ass, right? And because we ask it to do what's good for us,
Mm-hmm.
and what's good for us as like a whole long-term plan might not be good for what we think as an individual at this moment in space and time, anyhow. I agree with you. It's gonna rock us, you know what I mean? Especially once quantum computing comes online. We're going to be able to extrapolate our thoughts in a way that we don't even really know. And I would just ask the one question is, should we,
Yeah,
do
no,
we
I mean,
need to do this right now?
the smartest minds in the world are saying the same thing. They're like, hey, we need to put a pause on this AI development until we kind of figure out where we're going to go with this. And I agree with them. And at the same time, I know it's never going to happen, because just because these 5 companies decide to put a pause on it doesn't mean the other ones aren't, and they're just going to keep, progressing. I like that you brought up the how to kind of regulate it and stuff, and how the unintended consequences of regulation. We got a perfect example of that just a couple weeks ago when they want to do this TikTok ban here in the United States. And I think most people are like, yeah, why should we allow a foreign company who won't allow us to put apps on their app store, allow them to have an app on our app store that affects the psyche and the thoughts and the exposure of content of millions and millions of American children? How is that allowed? And most people are like, yeah, let's ban TikTok. Well, then we go, hey, government, the people that are supposed to be working for us, we'd like to ban TikTok. And they're like, all right, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it okay for the government to ban TikTok or any other app that we want to ban at any time for anything we ever want to do. And they put in a bunch of provisions for future, they were like talked about, like, I think quantum encryption, something that hasn't even been fully developed yet. They're like, and we'll be able to ban anything from this or cover this. It was like a total draconian like bill that gave them so much power and access to all these programs and stuff. And it's like, that's not what we wanted, man. We wanted you to, this one specific thing, get rid of it. We don't want it on the App Store anymore. And now you want to take it to this extreme level. So when we talk about regulating stuff, that's the stuff people got to remember too. And always remember this: maybe if you're a Republican or maybe if you're a Democrat and you're all for allowing this kind of oversight, unilateral oversight, hey, the president should be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, remember, those same powers are going to be there when the next president is in power and they're not of your party, and that's for both sides, people that hate on that. But I don't know, man. It's kind of crazy. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit since we're talking.
Yeah,
since we're talking technology and stuff. You were a sniper, with the Joint Task Force 2. Yep. How do you see? We've all seen videos from Ukraine and all this stuff going on over there, and I don't think any of us that went to Afghanistan or were involved in the global war on terror the last last decade really are surprised by the massive increase in the amount of drone warfare, including these little personal quadcopters, these DJI style small drones, not just the Predators and the Reapers, but these small ones. How does the sniper community stay relevant in a world where even a squad can have like a drone with an IR camera on it and can pick you out pretty easily? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot cheaper. No.
Yeah. Well, I don't know,
drones.
Man. Some of these, some of these drones are a couple $100.
Drones dropping grenades. Yeah, we saw it in Iraq. And
ISIS really kind of started that. I think people see it all in Ukraine and stuff, but ISIS and stuff really started that.
I'll say it like this, Justin, and I'm going to be this is like from my heart. I think it's all becoming irrelevant. Unfortunately, I think the days of killing other humans to solve an issue should be on its way out. I think all of it should become irrelevant. And I do think there's a real danger in using technology to do our killing. At least if I kill you in my hands, there's a reverence there. I know what it's like to split you open. Now, if we start using technology to do this, we remove that potential for remorse, for feelings, for killing other humans, and that's a whole different set of dangerous grounds. Now, I know the argument goes, well, what about putting our troops in danger? Well, it's like, well, if we're gonna fucking fight wars and we believe so deeply in it, as an individual soldier, as a country, as a collective of countries, then maybe that should be the price to pay. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have to give up my life overseas, but just like you, and in different ways, I had to think, okay, today is the day I could die. Today is the day I'm going to die, and that was a weight on me, and that weight really changed how I felt about fighting an enemy. And that I don't want to say it creates a bond, or it's a respect of sorts. But I think if we just go to technology, we lose that. But as far as relevance goes, I couldn't really think of, if like killing someone at 10K with a little pocket drone, and a sniper can maybe kill someone at, maybe we might get out to a 3-mile shot from a shoulder fired rifle that is a projectile. Maybe we might develop technology that's like laser style, or those rail guns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like, okay, now that the only thing that kind of plays in is discernment, but cameras are so good that discernment really plays out, like moves away from that. Maybe Overwatch, but again, like, what can a camera not do? That's what I mean. Like, we're creating irrelevancies in most of these things. Like, even very soon, room clearing, drones will be able to do it a lot quicker and with more accuracy and discernment than even an operator coming in. You know what I mean? So,
and without the danger of losing an operator that costs millions of dollars to train and equip, and
Yeah, well, yeah. So there is like I was a tier 1 sniper. It took millions to get me to there. You know what I mean? But then it's like, okay, where does the job come in? And that's usually where the gray role comes in, for the operator. And those days aren't done yet. There's still source handling and human and those kinds of intelligence gatherings that do have their place that a drone can't do. But as far as kinetic action, like, there's the places to have a human being doing kinetic action versus a robot is few and far between. But that's not I wouldn't put that as my argument. My argument would be like, okay, well, fuck, man, like, we're going to let computer mathematical programs decide who lives and dies. Like, when we look at all great religions and great philosophies, thou shalt not kill is, who is to fucking make a decision that someone else should die? Think about the magnitude of that decision. I know you've been there. I know I've been there. I know I've made that decision. And it wasn't until afterwards where I was like, holy fuck, man, in the complete plenum of what it means to be a human, what it means to be on Earth, what it means to be in the universe. Like, how was I ever responsible for that decision? Especially because as I stepped back, I was like, I don't fucking value everybody getting hyper rich and me fucking struggling more and more. I don't value that. I don't value destroying the planet. I don't value these things. Like, like I went in with an immature mind thinking what my values were. Now, again, that's a little bit strong because I know the world isn't there yet. I know there's still some residual low consciousness thinking. So that's where I would like, that's where my answer wants to go. Like, I kind of feel they're both relevant. And if you were to weigh it versus like a Canadian life versus like a Russian life, then yeah, you send the drone. But yeah, even in Iraq with ISIS, the writing was on the wall. Even before that, the writing was on the wall. Once we started doing like these hyper air stacks in Afghanistan and Iraq early on, and then the drones came in, it was like, okay, there is a place, but mostly it's just for human interaction. A drone can't fly in and sit down with a mullah and chit chat, right?
Yeah.
That's where a human can. I mean, yeah, we could do a Zoom call, but we lose a lot of the humanity in it.
I mean, and part of the thing too is that we sometimes we have our blinders on and we look at technology from our perspective as an American or North American citizen, and we don't look at it from the viewpoint of like an Afghan. Those dudes don't give a fuck about the internet. Those dudes don't care about Facebook updates or anything like that. they're not worried about AI or drones, or you know what I'm saying? Like they know they're out there. They know drones exist because they get popped every once in a while by them. But they're solely like focused on the ground street like tactics and stuff like that. Like
What
they use
it did them well
couriers.
though.
Yeah. Oh
It
no.
did them
Yeah.
well. Think about how long it took to, to find Usama. Because as we do that, that's where they got pressured into going, and it worked quite well. I mean, fuck, I know lots of people who died with IEDs that were never communicated over a cell phone. That didn't
Yeah.
use technology. Like that's kind of the, what did they call that? Like the results of escalation, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
I mean
yeah,
that's again that's we look at a problem and we go, how can we use technology to better our chances of solving this problem, or decreasing the results of this problem, like bad interaction, whatever it is. And sometimes it doesn't take a technological super advanced whatever. It takes a very basic, being one person on the ground to interact with the mullah or something like that. Like you said, you can't exchange that with a drone flying there and you're having a video conference with the guy. Like that's just not sometimes. And this kind of, I guess that kind of thought process where I forget that we're living in a world where people have all different kind of thoughts, and what life is means so much different to different cultures, and what morality is way different in other countries. And the biggest example of that is when Ukraine was invaded by Russia. And I was like, man, I thought we were past this. I thought we were, and people tried to like equate the U.S. going into Afghanistan and stuff like that. Not the same at all, because we never wanted it. We never said we wanted the Afghanistan. We never wanted to take over the country and annex it or anything like that. We were trying to kick out the terrorists and try to build up a government that could sustain themselves. This is a country attacking another country to annex it as its own, which I was like, what? We still do that? Like, I thought that was gone after World War II. You know what I'm saying? I thought, like, how can
yeah.
not even a, like, just a country doing it, but a country like Russia, where you would assume that their technology is advanced, their philosophy has advanced, their morality has advanced. And then they invade another country and you go, oh shit, maybe we're not as advanced and mature as a species as I thought. Maybe some of these,
no.
this world peace, like you're saying, like this, we're moving into an era where we shouldn't be killing each other. I 100% agree, but I don't think we're in the majority when you ask a lot of people in the world that same question.
No, well, no, you said it. So if we look at consciousness as the measurable fact, and I'll just like quickly cover what I mean by consciousness. Right now, you and I are handling feedback loops. We're getting input through our eyes and our ears and our skin, and you're having a drink of coffee. It's all like, and then all the thermodynamic regulation. There's millions of them happening. The higher someone's consciousness is, the more feedback loops they can handle, and not just handle, but the more they can open node think with them. They can make good, holistic, long-term, closer to what some might call enlightened decisions. And you're just right. Most people on planet Earth aren't there, because a lot of them are still, there's like 2.5 billion people who are hungry. They don't even have that need met. If you don't have your needs met, it's very hard to thrive. It's very hard to survive, let alone thrive, mentally expand your consciousness. And you hit the nail on the head. Afghanistan, as countries, we were different. Like the one thing technology does is explodes our rate of learning, our ability to communicate, our ability to start shifting. So you're right. It's very different, not just circumstantially. The idea wasn't to invade and make Afghanistan U.S. or coalition turf. So that changes that dynamic. But like Putin's an old KGB guy. You know what I mean? That's he doesn't realize his psychology runs on that. And his tools, he hasn't changed his tools. But that's like part of like the Orwell theory of like, as long as there's chaos over here, there's going to be benefits for people. And then over here handles some of the chaos and like that kind of shift. That's the mentality that I'd like to see go, because man, oh man, I don't know. It seems like the game is getting old. When I left, one of the things that we were doing as an SF unit more and more was expeditionary forces. So, and ideally that's what the SF is small forces that can go in and can have a lot of impact, right? Whether it's kinetic or hearts and minds kind of stuff or whatnot. And that is happening where, there's still some remnants of ISIS out there. There's still some remnants of garbage around the world. You know what I mean? It's internal to our own countries, and then there's external ones as well. I think one of the kind of cooler things I've seen in the last little while was, remember when there was, between the U.S. and Iran, there was some feathers ruffled there, and it wasn't looking good for a bit. You remember that? There was like a plane shot down. Trump was in power, but there wasn't an aggressive kinetic solution to solve it. To me, that was a big deal because, a lot of people speculate about Afghanistan being just a place where we built airfields so we can attack Iran. These were background thoughts where we can establish those air bases close, so it'd make that. And in a lot of ways, like, that was the Bush mindset, right? Original George Bush had an issue with Iran, and that was probably handed down to, W. And I'm speculating a lot of this. But my point on it is we didn't do that. You said it. There was the world, like, after Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot of people, at least in Canada, and I know in the US, we're like, okay, man, we're fucking done with our boys and girls being sent home in coffins. Like this, there's got to be some new tools. And
for what reason? And it was like, what's the justification here?
Yeah, well, in Afghanistan, I could give it to people very quickly. Many schools, 6,500 schools opened up by the time just 2009 rolled around. Their Afghani, their dollar went up by almost 40 cents. Women went to school. They were allowed out. Children went back to school. That's huge. If those aren't measurable metrics for some kind of success, I don't know what is. Iraq at that time, I have a little less tangibles. I do know when I did go there, the Kurds were pretty happy about the situation that was going on, not being under bin Laden's thumb, about having their own kind of country back. I do think there'll be some tensions in the long run because most of the oil fields were surrounded in Kurdistan and not Iraq proper, and that could be a long-term issue. I don't know. So, that's a good result. But it goes back to the question, like, is it worth someone's life? I don't know. That's where it gets really to be a very heavy decision. And I think that anyone who makes that decision should have skin in the game of some sort, where they are making the decision where their life or someone very close to them, their lives are on the line, so that they know that. So they know, like, okay, this is a real decision. This is a life or death. This is a real decision. Because they shouldn't be taken lightly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one of the proponents for bringing back the draft. We're having this like government mandated service for like 2 years or something like that, is because there's so many people that don't have, even they're so far removed from it that they don't even understand how the government is working or how government service even works, because there's never been a requirement for them or their family to be involved. Was there a draft in Canada? Because since the draft was ended in the U.S., the all volunteer military, which is a great thing, it just removed military service from the average household from their like table conversations. You know what I'm saying? Because they're no longer involved. Was the same thing kind of in Canada? I don't know if you guys had a draft or not. I assume it's something.
No, the last time we had, we called it conscription, I think, was World War One. Okay. After that, it was all volunteer. But I do think, again, it has to be carefully managed, but there is, you do a couple years in the military, there's a lot of benefit, especially as a transition time. And then, like you said, it puts everyone's skin in the game equally, not just those who can't afford the Ivy Leagues. And it gives you an idea of what a lot of people, I mean, in the US, there's quite a few more soldiers, but by and large, most people don't know what it's like to give that kind of sacrifice. And I'm not even talking about your life. I'm just talking about sacrificing for an ideal like that. Like, it's not all high fives and butt slaps in the military. It's got it's shit, and you give up a lot, and you give it up in trust that it's for this ideal, right? But if you never tasted that, it's called the relativity of attributes. If you haven't experienced something, it's very hard for you to have the attributes that have developed from that experience, right? You can talk about it, but until you've really experienced it, it's hard to have those attributes. And like, just to circle it back, I'm just saying, if people are going to be making those decisions, they should certainly have some skin in the game 100%. Or have experienced some of that. But I think it'd also be a good way to transition people to keep them away from drugs and alcohol as an abuse substance, not just keep them away like I'm some prude, just to help them transition, to make a few bucks, probably continue on education. Israel and Switzerland and South Korea, they're all pretty successful with these things. So
I'm not, and when I
then
say
you serve your country,
yeah,
then you can say you serve your country.
And I'm not advocating, like, if this was something that came down, I wouldn't be like, yeah, man, everybody has to serve in the military. It would be more of a something within the government, maybe because we used to have this thing called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And that's what really built all the national parks around the United States and built thousands of miles of trailheads and stuff like that. And did all these things. This was one of those programs during the Great Depression, and it was a group of guys that got, you volunteered, you got sent away to whatever camp, and then you worked out of that camp. You got fed 3 meals a day. You got a paycheck, but I think it was like 50% of your paycheck had to be sent back home to your family. And the whole point is that you're learning skills, you're outside working, you're in good shape, you're getting fed in a time when not everybody was getting fed in the United States. It's a Great Depression. And you're also contributing to the economy by sending money back to your family so that they can help support their local economies, buy things and stuff like that. There could be a debate on how successful the program was in the end, like the financials or whatever. But I think saying that it's wasn't, I don't know, seeing something like that, I feel like we could do that again. And that's a net positive for the country. You're building outdoor spaces for everyone. You're adding money to the economy. You're taking people out of food poverty to where they're getting meals and they understand what it means to have a healthy lifestyle, And in reality, a lot of those people, because this was Great Depression time frame, a lot of those people took that training and that kind of rigid, because it was almost a military kind of lifestyle being part of the Civilian Conservation Corps. They rolled right into the military and were very successful members of the military during World War II, because Pearl Harbor happened not too long after all that and everything like that. So I don't know. I think some kind of community service or government service should be done just to give people a better understanding of the world that they live around. How many times did you go to Afghanistan?
Well, I'll just say once.
Okay. Let's the first time you went to Afghanistan, what was that like for you? Like the cultural shock of going from Canada to Afghanistan?
I had traveled pretty extensively, but there was a pretty massive culture shock, even though training by that point, like if I was there in 2001, it would have been very different than 2008 because our training, like you remember, like the training sites were so realistic, everything was like really realistic. So the culture shock, the into updates were less, but yeah, it's a massive culture shock.
It's just an agrarian society living in dirt huts. And especially if you live in a city, let's say you come from New York City and you were to go to Afghanistan and that's your first visit outside the country, your mind would be blown. Your mind would be blown. You'd be like, how is this, like, what is happening here? People are drinking out of a canal that their animals are bathing in. It's like,
no, it was, but that's where the conversation gets really tricky, though, right? Is when we try to bring our ideals there, and they have theirs, and some of them, like you said, they're dinosaur ideals, like.
Well, I guess my point though was that not like, oh, they're so backward society, that's crazy, is the experience. Like if you were to get that government service and you get to have these experiences that you wouldn't have. I can come home and tell my friends about what it's like to walk down a street in Hong Kong. You know what I'm saying? Not many people from Indiana are going to be able to tell you what it's like to go out and do stuff in Singapore or go to Iraq or go to Afghanistan and kind of like actually know what it's like to be with these cultures. I was an Afghan advisor, so I got to actually live and work and do stuff with the Afghans more so than the average guy did. And just that kind of experience makes me come back here and appreciate things that I have, being able to turn the lights on whenever I want, flush the toilet whenever I want, take a drink of water out of the tap whenever I want. If I'm hungry, I'm going to go down, I can order something. I don't even have to leave my house anymore. I can go on DoorDash and have it brought to me. Whereas over there, they have to grow their food, kill it. And, it's just, I don't know. To me, I'm so grateful for the experiences that I've had. And it's it's hard for me to be upset about a lot of stuff because I know how bad it could be. You know what I'm saying? I look at what we have and go, man, we are doing pretty well. Like you said at the very beginning of the show, you were like, you know, it's hard to complain when you're in the West and you have full belly and, you know, Amazon will bring me the package I want tomorrow and stuff like that. And if that's the only kind of experience you have, if that's the only worldview you have, you've never been challenged with going into an Asian market and seeing how they are, or going into like an agrarian society like the Afghan countryside and seeing how they are living outdoors and cooking on fires and stuff like that. You never really understand how good you have it or how things in your own society could change to be better. You know what I'm saying? Because you never looked at like, oh, wait, they are agrarian and they do this way, but the way they do that is really smart and everyone seems to like it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. It's all about life experiences.
I agree. If you're going to try to, people's paradigm should shift, because the second you think your paradigm is perfect, you are now going to be part of the problem. That's just how it is. There's nobody that's perfect, right? Nobody is perfectly in line in the world. They're not perfectly aligned with themselves. We do our best. You know, some people do better than others. But as soon as you think your paradigm is the one, that's where we run into problems. And you can only really have it shift or wade in new paradigms. That's one of the beauties of it. And like you said, the military, or at least something like that, creates the opportunities for good, what we call striving in Latin, suffering together, while being exposed to these new paradigms, these new places and things like that. Yeah. Because like, you know, my view on the military has changed drastically since I left, but I'm very grateful for my experiences. Even the shitty ones, you know what I mean? Like they taught me so much. Misery. Like they've given me so much new perspective, it takes a while to figure out what those are, you know, like, and that kind of circles back to what we were talking about with veterans. It can be a little bit of a shitty dance to root those out at times.
Well, like the United States, Canada is a massive country, and people are going to be different opinions, different kind of worldviews and stuff from all parts of Canada. And I imagine it's like the United States military, where you're bringing in all these people from these different corners of the country with different values and different likes and dislikes and stuff like that. And you're all being kind of grouped together, and you're being exposed to just so many different, even if you never even leave the country, being exposed to so many different cultures because of, one, America is just like a melting pot, and all these people are joining the military, and you're in one platoon. You got people from New York City, from, you know, bumfuck Alabama, from Colorado, you know, downhill skier guy. You know, it's just so many different people with different kind of perspectives. You get to like learn from each other and kind of realize like, oh, you know, people from here do this, but this is why, or you know, it's like, I don't know. It's such a good experience.
A good point, though. It's a good point, because people now, one of the things with the wired world is people can lose sight that they haven't explored their own country that way, you know, and like the amount of range, because you did say melting pot. You would also agree, though, that all those places you named have their own cultures, subcultures within them.
Oh, for sure.
Like, and it's really cool to put that together and like have your own worldview challenged. And the military does do that. Because that's like, we don't have nearly the same kind of population, but we have like a similar, if we go from west to east coast, it shifts a lot along the way, you know.
I think it's cool that you said at the beginning how you said you traveled through almost all the states in the United States. I really wish more Americans would take advantage of that, and I really wish more people realized how big the United States is and how different each state is. We compare ourselves to like Germany or France or whatever all the time, and I'm like, why are we doing that? We should really be comparing ourselves to the European Union, because every state is almost like its own little country that has its own way of doing stuff. And to try to say that we're all should be on the same page about one thing or another is just that's just not going to work, because it's just not how the country is. You know, that's why that's one of the issues that we have. And I was always one of those people where I like reading a lot. I like researching, but I see it as like, if I read about a historical event or a place or something like that, me reading about it is almost me prepping myself to go see it. I don't want to just read about it. I want to go see what it was, what it looks like, what it was. You know, you said you traveled. I also did like a cross country kind of road trip and took a few weeks to just go see stuff. You know, stuff I read about in history books in school and on documentaries, and you know where Custer's Last Stand was, where Martin Luther King was assassinated. You know, like all these different places that are important historical points deserve more of our attention than a small blurb in a blog that we read or a little paragraph in a history book. You know, people really ought to take the time to go see what their country is all about and see what, you know, see these places. It's just crazy, you know?
If I could just say something on that, so that we go back to where I see a tiny bit of issue with AI, and that's the term wisdom unearned. You know, like seeing a picture of a plaque of a place in South Dakota is one thing. Going there, soaking up that air and seeing that environment, stepping ish into those footsteps, you know, completely changes it, and it just builds a different perspective. And that's the difference between information and knowledge, and then eventually embodiment of that knowledge. You know, we have a lot of people who speak from a place of information and not full embodiment. Of course, there's discussions, you know, like we were kind of playfully discussing the concept of government mandated service, you know, whether it's military or whatnot. But that, to me, we take that as discussion, you know, that's totally different. Sure. But then we have people though that make these decisions that are hardlines, that are really just from an information point of view. And unless people get up and open up their eyes, and I get it, a lot of people can't afford to travel and whatnot.
100%.
You know, like there is those things, but you know,
you just gotta, I think it's just, you gotta look at what's around you and go, there's more out there. And the mindset of people I want around me are the people that want to go see that stuff, that strive to explore new things, to be challenged, not necessarily like views challenged, but just to again, go see stuff in person, to see what it's like, see what the smell is like. You know what I'm saying? Like you talked about before, how people can't, sometimes, you know, people can't really understand what a firefight or something is unless you're there. And part of that is like the senses that are just firing. You know, what does it smell like when there's gunfire going off? What did it feel like to get up behind cover and you kind of lose your grip a little bit in the sand because of your boot or something like that? You know, what did this kind of grass feel like? Or were you in an area that had cacti? And, you know, it's just like all these little like kind of things that make that an actual experience. You can't translate that into text. It can't come from a book. It can't come from a documentary. You can get an idea and kind of a slight understanding of the situation, but until you go there and you see it and you feel it, it's going to be really hard to fully understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. The full nuance of it all.
That's what I'm all about, man. Just experience stuff. And someone like you, you know, you made it to the top of your country's military. I imagine there were experiences along the way that just kind of made you question decisions, but also made you like reinforce decisions that you made and stuff. I do want to just, before we jump off here, I mean, we've kind of talked a lot of all kinds of crazy stuff, not crazy stuff, but we haven't really talked too much about the actual like military stuff. In the Canadian military, if someone wanted to get into the Joint Task Force 2, what's kind of the steps for that?
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind me backing up just a little, Justin, I do like to give a shout out to our ladies and gentlemen. Despite what some might think, Canada has a very distinguished and rich military history, especially from the 19th century. You know, we played big roles in World War I and II. You know, we were there the whole time in World War II, the Korean War, and through many, I think it was like 35,000 Canadians became American citizens to fight in Vietnam. You know, we were there financially in support. Even the original Gulf War, you know, we had troops there. Gulf War II, indirectly money and funding. And then eventually, you know, once ISIS sparked up, we were there as well. Afghanistan. You know, we've been an ally, not just to the U.S., but to an ally for good for a lot of the world. And we actually had a very big military after World War II and World War I. So we don't have any direct entry programs for our SF. We don't have like an X-ray program or whatnot. So you have to either become a reservist or a full-time member, and you have to serve 2 or 3 years, depending. And then you're able to apply to go down an SF route. Statistically, you're most likely to make it if you've gone through either one of our other special operations route, like CSOR, because I'm specifically talking about Joint Task Force 2. Our CSORs, our Canadian Special Operations Regiment, a little bit, just for a placeholder, similar to your Green Berets. But really, being a paratrooper in the infantry is the best way to harden up your body and prepare yourself for these routes. It doesn't, I'll just speak to JTF-2s. We have a week-long selection. It's very scientifically calibrated to pick out character attributes and cognitive attributes, which we call like a neuropsychological test. It's very difficult. It is very hard. It's designed to twist your mind. Like it is difficult on your body, but the understanding is that you're already super fit. A lot of the fitness standards are, I don't want to quite say like Olympic in their levels, but they're extremely they're extremely high
for sure.
And I should back up. There is some psychological testing done before where the ice cube is shaved. It's shaved a lot, actually. Thousands are shaved right off those tests. And then we have small numbers that show up, usually about 3 or 4 serials, about 30 dudes each. And, it's kind of got, at that point, about like a similar 7 to 11% pass rate or acceptance rate. It's because it's one thing to make it through, because you can make it through and not be accepted.
Yeah.
And then you go on to your assaulters course, which again is JTF-2 specific. And it can vary. Some years they run a little bit longer. Sometimes they'll run stuff. They'll take like an insertion method and it's run at the squadron level, or it's tacked on to the course itself. So it can vary between, say 7 and 10 months. But it's the same stuff. You get the same stuff. And this one here, again, it's just constantly the bottom is chopped, and I was talking to this about with one of your SEAL Team 6 guys about the pressure that this creates, where you're like, you're like never really good enough. You just keep struggling. You're there. It really messes with you psychologically, but it's part of the point of it, right? Is to not only see if you really want to be part of these units, but to weigh your mettle. And we cover, hey-ho, other insertion methods, driving, pretty much not every single insertion method you can think of, like paramotoring and stuff like that you'll get to later on, like a little bit fancier, but pretty much your insertion methods, your survival, your evasion, resistance, interrogation stuff. Very important is basic and advanced CQB, kind of create the foundation of your operator. We certainly have world-class CQB. We're lucky too, we're tapped in with other great nations that have great military. So there's great information exchange there, a lot of lessons learned. Maybe the US has learned a lesson the hard way. We don't have to learn it the hard way, right? We get to incorporate that quicker. Same with the British and all the Five Eyes and stuff like that. And then it kind of covers 3 roles. Your green role, which is your traditional camis kind of soldier and in the bush, recon, that kind of jazz. Your black role, which is your counterterrorism roles. And then your gray role, which is, source handling, plain clothes kind of stuff. And that's one of the kind of cooler things about us. We'll do our mandate is national and abroad, unlike other militaries. So that gives us, sometimes I used to think of it as more of a headache, because you have like this giant job description, and it can be hard, to maintain a lot of skills. Like, when you have 100 skills you got to maintain, it's harder than maintaining 50 skills. So I don't know where they're at now. Some of those must have been mandated down to like our CSOR regiment. But that was an education on its own. Once again, like we were saying, exposure to things. Like, I'll give one little story, just not like as if it's like a whoa, this is a crazy story, because it's not a crazy story, but it's just like one of those moments where you're like, this is a perspective I haven't thought of. We were doing some subway counterterrorism training, and we basically used explosives. All the windows were bashed in, every kind of insertion method on this sub that was going to be decommissioned. And then we're in the sub, lights are out, it's all blacked out, and we're riding it back to the main station where they're going to take it off the track and whatnot. But we're going through live subway channels, and people like this sub pulls up and it's got to stop just because of traffic purposes. And, you know, the sheep are all like, oh, and then they like realize like, okay, there's no lights on. It's just guys with guns and armor, and all the cars are smashed in. And it was, but you're driving along, and like, this is in Toronto, and it's like, there's a moment where I was like, fuck, man, nobody else gets to experience this kind of stuff. You know, like that's just a little micro moment. Like I could go on and on and on and on about those kinds of things where you're like, huh, it feels pretty cool. You know, this is an education that no one else can pay to be a part of. You have to earn this. And there's something about that earning a place in a small group, in a high echelon group, that is very, very rewarding.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. We just recently, a couple months ago, the 160th did some, their, what do they call it? The realistic urban training here in San Diego, and bringing in little birds and landing on top of some of the skyscrapers and stuff. And you see all the videos starting to pop up on social media. And that's one of those things where, like, if you were part of that, you're like, yeah, that was pretty cool. Like, that's pretty
just
sick.
To fly over a city in a helicopter, in an attack helicopter of any kind, is like, and on a low, you know, where you don't usually get that airspace, is like,
yeah.
Huh. And then to rappel into a building and then rappel down that building, and like, it's like, yeah, okay, most people don't get to experience this kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, I totally space sometimes that most people have never even ridden in a helicopter, let alone some of the stuff we've done. And I'll talk about it, and people are like, fuck no, I would never get in a helicopter. And I'm like, what? Like, it's just such a, it's a one-off kind of experience. And unfortunately, like with that, you know, there's with those one-off experiences, there's the craziness that comes with it. You know, with riding in a helicopter, sometimes you get to ride in a helicopter off a boat, which isn't as much fun. You know, it seems like a little sketchy when you're flying over the ocean. I don't know if you ever have, but I've been in a helicopter that we thought was gonna crash, and was like flying like all crazy, like it was about to crash. Luckily, it did not. But I know a lot of guys that have been in helicopter crashes and stuff like that. And it's like, oh yeah, like the average person has never even been in a helicopter. How could they relate to a guy that's been in a helicopter crash? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, let alone in a foreign country with people shooting at you, and, you know, collateral damage, and all the little nuances.
Yeah, we kind of take for granted the cool stuff that we're getting to do while we're in the military. And I see a lot of guys that are just like, fuck the Marines, I can't wait to get out of the Army, you know, I hate this is stupid. And then they get out and they're like, oh shit, I fucked up. You know, like I was actually having a good time and I didn't even realize it. Because you don't realize the opportunities that are being provided to you just seem like, oh, well, everyone here gets to do this, so this seems normal. But then you get away from the military, and then you realize, no, it's not normal that you got to go hike 10 miles and get paid to do it, or you go shooting all the time. And, you know, I don't know. It's just perspective, you know? It's all about that
one of the things the military could learn, though, is when people are having fun, they learn at a much higher rate. So they don't need the same kind of repetition as when they're learning under stress. Now, there's a time to learn in stress, and then there's a time to learn in fun. You know, especially for like the general, like militaries, they could learn that lesson a little quicker. That it doesn't always have to be the fun sucked out of it to make you hard.
Yeah.
Like there's a time and a place. You can do a little bit of both. I think if they learned that a little bit faster, because like in basic training, it's supposed to suck. You're not supposed to have fun. But like if you're doing some other stuff that's already scary, we'll say like fast roping. You know, I remember the first time I swung out onto a skid to do some fast rope, and stand on a skid doing 100 knots in a chopper, just soaking up the wind, me holding onto a strap, holding the fast rope, and it's like, what the fuck is going on here? You know, like and the objective's still up there. You know, it's crazy, right?
Death is a possibility.
No, like to be a dick about it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like you said, with training, it's there, and that kind of makes it cool, right? It gives you that edge. It's a level of excitement.
Yeah, when I was a mechanic, my first 3 years, I came in, like I said, I've talked about this on the podcast a lot in the earlier ones. I was a mechanic. I came in open contract, meaning I let the military choose what job they wanted to give me. It was a fucking mistake. Yeah, total mistake, because I wanted infantry. And I became a mechanic, and I got to the fleet, to my unit, you know, after all my training and stuff, and there were NCOs there that were just dickheads for no reason. Always yelling, always this, everything's, just crazy. And I'm like, look, dudes, I was a little older when I came in, so I wasn't like this 18-year-old, like scared kid. I didn't speak back to them, obviously, because I'm still a fucking new guy. But I could look at it and go, no one's listening to you, man. When you're just screaming at people, just to scream at people, no, we're all switches turned off. Finish your little tantrum, and then we'll move on to whatever it is we're going to do. You don't have to be, like you said, it doesn't have to be like hardcore all the time. There doesn't have to be a DI kind of mentality about everything. Just like let people, I don't know, just let people like fucking live, like add stress as needed, but don't be a dickhead for no reason. I can never understand the guys that tried to embody this almost Hollywood persona of a Marine where they're like hardcore all the time and they have to scream and it's like, dude, you're getting nothing done. Let's just treat people like an adult and speak to them. And
it doesn't really add to anything. Like it doesn't.
What's the training value?
I can yell doesn't make me a better killer. It didn't make me better at the job. Like that like it's one of those funny things. I like how you say the Full Metal Jacket-esque kind of approach.
I just saw that all the time, and I was like, it was a very good example of how not to be a leader. And it treated me well because I go, hey, I'm not going to be that. In my 12 years and less than that, let's say, I think I picked up sergeant. And so in 8 years that I was sergeant or above, I probably yelled at a guy a handful of times, and it would be like that guy fucking did something over and over and over again where it was like, dude, what are you doing? Kind of situations. Whereas some guys just go straight for it.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, I've tried tactic A, B, and C. It is a training. This is actually going to maybe sink into their head. But you said it though, like most guys who are really learning leadership skills and whatnot get out of the military, or like at least in Canada, part of the promotion is you have to be stupid. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, people get tired of being micromanaged by people that they see as incompetent. And it's like, why do I put myself through this? I don't need to necessarily do this, so. Well, man, I'm going to wrap it up since we're getting close to 2 hours. I know you got a stopping point there. I really appreciate the conversation. I think it was not my typical podcast conversation, but I think we touched on a ton of really awesome topics. I think the viewers are going to enjoy it. And if you'd like to come on some other time, we can definitely set that up. Where can people find out more about you, your organization, all that?
Yeah. I really appreciate us exploring those topics, Justin, by the way. You can head to the specialforcesexperience.com and then head down the rabbit hole there for Citizen Green type stuff for the veterans and our other programs. And then posttraumaticgrowth.film. I'd love it if people headed that way and started checking out the trailer and whatnot. We are doing a final push May 11th to get the last bit of funding we need to finish the documentary and begin our impact campaign with this, where we start really shifting the conversation around just what it means to be human and the human experience, but mostly around anti-PTSD and those kind of growth measures. It's been a real pleasure, Justin.
Yeah, man. The trailer was really well produced. I saw, I watched that before and I was like, wow, this is like really, very Hollywood level kind of production there. I thought the editing and stuff was really, as someone that does video editing and stuff, I thought that was a really well produced trailer. So people should definitely go check that out. As always, people can check out my website, jkramergraphics.com, for custom print goods, stuff like that. If you guys want to do a unit purchase, but you don't want to have to collect money from everyone, I just put the items up on the website so everybody can order individually. No one person has to collect all the cash. I also, like I mentioned, I don't really ever talk about on the podcast, I am in digital marketing. If you have a company, a website, you need SEO, you need to learn how to rank on Google, you need audit done, feel free to reach out to me, jkramermedia@gmail.com. My Instagram is @formeractionguys, @formeractionnews. And that's it, man. This has been, again, a really good conversation.